I stood in the freezing mud watching the man who promised to protect my daughter commit a crime. Jason threw a heavy wooden crate into the river like it was garbage. When I pulled it out, I didn't find trash. I found a living soul and a secret so dark it would burn our family to the ground. That night, the old Victor died in the water. The man who climbed out was ready for war. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and for 40 of those years, I ran the toughest construction crews in Chicago. I built skyscrapers, hospitals, and bridges. My hands are scarred, my back is stiff, and since my wife Martha passed away 6 months ago, I haven't slept more than 3 hours a night. Insomnia is a curse, but on this particular Tuesday, it was the only thing that saved a life. I was sitting in my old leather armchair by the window, staring out at the darkness, trying to ignore the silence of the big house. It used to be full of life, but now it felt like a mausoleum. My daughter Emily was sleeping upstairs, weak and sick from an illness the doctors couldn't seem to diagnose. Her husband Jason Thorne slept in the guest room because he claimed he didn't want to disturb her rest. Jason, the man who walked around my house like he owned the deed, checking his reflection in every mirror, always talking about big deals and investments that never seemed to pay off. That night, the sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. I looked out and saw Jason's silver Audi creeping toward the old boat launch at the edge of the property. He didn't turn on his headlights. That was the first red flag. A man doing honest work doesn't drive in the dark. I grabbed my coat and my flashlight, moving with a speed I didn't think my old legs possessed anymore. By the time I reached the tree line near the river, he was already at the water's edge. I saw him struggle with something in the trunk. It was a wooden crate, roughly nailed together, about the size of a large suitcase. It looked heavy. Jason was a man who paid people to mow the lawn, a man who complained if he got a paper cut. Yet here he was sweating, heaving this heavy box toward the water. He paused at the edge. For a second, I thought he might stop. I thought he might have a conscience, but then he kicked it. The splash echoed like a gunshot in the quiet night. He stood there for a moment watching it bob in the dark current. Then he turned his back on it, got in his car, and sped off toward the main road. My construction instincts kicked in. I knew the current in this part of the river. It was slow near the bank, but deadly further out. The box hadn't sunk immediately, which meant there was air inside, but it was taking on water fast. I didn't think. I didn't consider my arthritis or the freezing temperature. I slid down the embankment mud, soaking my pajama bottoms, and waded into the water. The cold was a physical blow, punching the air out of me. It stung my skin like 1,000 needles. I waded out until the water was up to my chest. My boots sank into the silt, making every step a battle. I saw the corner of the crate dipping below the surface about 10 ft away. I lunged for it. My fingers brushed the rough wood. I grabbed the corner and pulled. It was heavier than I expected. Dead weight fighting against me. I gritted my teeth, channeling every ounce of strength I had left from my days hauling lumber and steel. "I am not letting you go," I grunted, dragging it backward toward the shore. When I finally heaved it onto the muddy grass, I collapsed for a second, gasping for air. The box was silent now. The whimpering had stopped. Panic surged through me. I pulled out my old Swiss Army knife, the one I've carried since 1985, and jammed the blade under the lid. Jason had used long nails driven in deep. He wanted this to be a tomb. I pried and twisted the wood, splintering the metal, groaning. One nail popped, then another. I ripped the lid back with a roar of frustration. I shined my flashlight inside and my heart shattered. It was Buster, my daughter's 12-year-old golden retriever. The dog that had sat by her bed every single day since she got sick. The dog that was the only source of joy left in her life. He was curled up in a tight ball, shivering violently, His golden fur was matted and wet. But it was what Jason had done to him that made bile rise in my throat. Layers of thick silver duct tape were wrapped tightly around his muzzle, clamping his jaw shut so he couldn't bark. His front and back paws were bound together with the same tape. He looked up at me with eyes full of terror and confusion, his chest barely moving. "Oh, buddy!" I whispered, my voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, I'm here." I carefully cut the tape from his legs first. He didn't move. He was too weak, too cold. I sliced the tape around his muzzle, peeling it away gently, so I wouldn't tear his skin. He let out a long, ragged exhale and licked my hand. He was alive barely. I went to lift him out of the box, intending to rush him to the house. But as I slid my hands under his belly to support him, I felt something hard. It wasn't the wood of the crate. It was plastic. Thick, crinkling plastic. I frowned and shifted Buster's weight. Underneath the dog, taped to the bottom of the crate, was a thick manila envelope wrapped in heavy-duty construction plastic. It was sealed tight, waterproofed. Why would Jason throw a dog in the river? To kill it, yes? To hurt Emily, yes, but why put a package underneath the dying animal? I realized then, with a chill, that had nothing to do with the river water, that Buster wasn't just a victim. He was the weight. He was the anchor meant to drag this package to the bottom of the Chicago River, where no one would ever find it. Jason used the living body of my daughter's best friend to hide his secrets. I ripped the package free from the bottom of the crate and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. I didn't look at it, not yet. The priority was the life in front of me. I wrapped my wet coat around Buster and lifted him into my arms. He weighed about 70 lei, but adrenaline made him feel light as a feather. I couldn't take him back to the house. If Jason came back and saw the dog, he would know I knew. He would know his plan had failed. And worse, if Emily saw Buster like this, half drowned and traumatized, the shock might kill her in her fragile state. I needed help, and I needed it quietly. I carried Buster to my truck, an old Ford F-150 that I kept parked near the garage. I laid him on the passenger seat and cranked the heater up to full blast. I drove without headlights until I hit the main road. Then I floored it toward the only person I trusted, Dr. Sarah. She was a veterinarian who had treated my dogs for 30 years. A woman with a spine of steel who owed me a favor for fixing her barn roof last winter. I pounded on her front door at 3:15 in the morning. When she opened it wearing a bathrobe and holding a baseball bat, she took one look at me, dripping wet and shivering, and then at the bundle in my arms. "Victor," she said, dropping the bat, "get in here." We worked on Buster on her kitchen table. She gave him warm fluids, checked his lungs, and treated the raw skin where the tape had been. He swallowed a lot of water. "Victor," she said, listening to his chest with her stethoscope, "and his heart rate is erratic, but he's a fighter. He's going to make it." I slumped into a chair, water pooling around my boots. "Who did this?" Sarah asked, her voice low and dangerous. I looked at the dog. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the plastic-wrapped package. It was still dry. "Jason," I said, "my son-in-law." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Does Emily know no?" I said. "And she can't know?" "Not yet." "Sarah, you have to promise me something. As far as anyone knows, as far as Jason knows, Buster is dead. He ran away. He got lost. He vanished. You keep him here. You heal him. But he is a ghost now." She looked at me, seeing the hard look in my eyes that I hadn't worn since I retired from the construction business. She nodded. "I'll keep him safe, Victor." "But what are you going to do?" I stood up, feeling the cold weight of the document package in my hand. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark night. The old Victor, the tired, grieving widower hour, had drowned in that river tonight. The man standing in Sarah's kitchen was the man who used to fire dishonest subcontractors and tear down faulty structures. "I'm going home," I said. "I'm going to dry off." And in the morning, I'm going to sit at the breakfast table and ask Jason how he slept. And then I am going to open this package and find out exactly why he tried to bury the truth under a dog. I drove back to the house as the first gray light of dawn started to bleed into the sky. I parked the truck, snuck in through the back door, and hid the plastic package inside the hollow space behind the baseboard in my closet, a hiding spot I had built years ago for valuables. I took a scalding hot shower to wash away the river muck and the chill scrubbing until my skin was red. As I dressed, I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my face lined with exhaustion, but my hands were steady. Jason thought I was just a senile old man who spent his days mourning and gardening. He thought I was blind. He thought I was weak. He was about to find out that he had just tried to drown the wrong dog. And in doing so, he had woken up the wolf. I went downstairs to the kitchen. The coffee maker was already gurgling. I poured myself a cup. Black, no sugar. I sat at the head of the table and waited. 10 minutes later, I heard Jason's footsteps. He walked in wearing a crisp blue suit smelling of expensive cologne, looking for all the world like a successful, caring husband. "Morning, Victor," he said, flashing that bright, fake smile. "Did you sleep well?" I took a sip of coffee, staring at him over the rim of the mug. I watched his hands as he reached for the sugar bowl. They were shaking just a tiny bit, like a baby Jason. I lied, my voice steady as a rock. Like a baby. Emily came down the stairs a few minutes later holding the banister with a grip so tight her knuckles were white. My daughter looked like a ghost of the vibrant woman she used to be. Her skin was gray, her eyes sunken and red, rimmed from crying. She was wearing her old flannel robe, the one she used to wear on Sunday mornings, when we would make pancakes, but now it hung off her skeletal frame. She didn't look at the food. She looked straight at the empty spot by the back door where Buster's water bowl used to sit. "I haven't seen him, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I called for him all morning. He never misses breakfast." Jason stood up immediately, rushing over to her. He guided her to a chair like she was made of glass. His movements practiced and smooth. He smelled of expensive sandalwood cologne and lies. "Sit down, sweetheart," Jason said, pouring her a glass of orange juice. "You need to keep your strength up." "Where is he, Jason?" she asked, ignoring the juice. "Where is Buster?" Jason sighed, a performance of patience that made my skin crawl. He sat down next to her and took her hand, rubbing it gently. I watched his face. It was the face of a man who could sell sand to a man dying of thirst. "I called animal control first thing this morning," he said softly. "They said they haven't picked him up. But the officer told me something that, well, it's hard to hear what she asked. Tears spilling over. He said that when dogs get as old as Buster, sometimes their instincts take over. They know when their time is coming, Emily. They don't want to distress their pack. They wander off to find a quiet place to rest." Emily let out a sob that sounded like something tearing inside her chest. She buried her face in her hands. "No," she cried. "He wouldn't leave me. He knows I need him. He didn't want you to see him suffer." Jason said, leaning in to kiss her temple. "He did it because he loved you. It's nature, honey. We have to accept it." I took a sip of my black coffee to keep from screaming. The cup rattled against my teeth. I had to use every ounce of self-control I had built over 70 years not to reach across that table and wrap my hands around his throat. He was using the dog's loyalty, the very thing he had betrayed and tried to murder, to manipulate my daughter's grief. He was twisting a knife in her heart and calling it comfort. Jason looked up and caught me staring. His expression shifted instantly. The concern vanished, replaced by that familiar condescending smirk he reserved just for me. "You're quiet this morning, Victor," he said. "And you are coughing. You sound terrible." I cleared my throat, feeling the phantom burn of the freezing river water in my lungs. It was a deep, wet cough that I couldn't quite suppress. Just a bit of a chill, I muttered. Drafty house. Jason chuckled, shaking his head as he buttered a piece of toast. Drafty house, or were you out wandering again? He asked. I thought I heard the back door open around 2:00 in the morning. I gripped my mug harder. He was testing me. He wanted to know if I'd seen anything. I have trouble sleeping, Jason, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. You know that? Sometimes I need fresh air. He nodded, biting into his toast with a crunch that sounded obscene in the quiet kitchen. You need to be careful, Victor, he said, his mouth full. The neighbors have been talking. They see you staring out the windows at all hours. They see you walking the property line, mumbling to yourself. I don't mumble, I said. Jason waved his hand dismissively. I am just saying we have to think about what is best for everyone. With Emily so sick, I can't be worrying about you getting lost in the woods or falling into a ditch. Maybe it is time we revisited that brochure for the Sunrise Assisted Living Facility. They have excellent security there. They make sure people stay put. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He wasn't just being mean. He was laying the groundwork. If I spoke up, if I accused him of anything, he would play the silly card. Who would the police believe, the successful, sharp-dressed husband caring for his dying wife, or the 70-year-old man who wandered around at night and saw conspiracies in the shadows? I looked at him. Really looked at him. I remembered the day he walked onto my construction site 10 years ago. He was a kid then, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit, begging for an internship in the project management office. He didn't know a girder from a gentle breeze. I took him under my wing because Emily liked him. I taught him how to read a blueprint. I paid for their wedding when he claimed his family had cut him off. I put the down payment on their first house. And now here he was, sitting at my table, eating my food, wearing a watch I bought him for his 30th birthday, and plotting to lock me away so he could finish off my daughter and take what was left of my life's work. I pushed my chair back. The screech of the wooden legs against the floor made Jason jump. I am not going anywhere, Jason, I said, my voice low and raspy. I am staying right here with my daughter. He held my gaze for a second, his eyes cold and dead like a shark's, before he smiled again. Of course, Victor, whatever makes you happy. I left the kitchen before I did something that would ruin the plan. I could hear Emily still weeping softly as I walked up the stairs. My heart ached for her, but I knew that comforting her now with the truth would be dangerous. She was too fragile. If I told her Jason tried to drown Buster, she might confront him. And Jason was dangerous. I needed a weapon. I needed ammunition. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I knelt down by the baseboard in the closet and pried it loose. The plastic-wrapped package was there, cold and damp against my hand. I carried it to my desk and sat down. I pulled out my pocket knife again, the blade still stained with residue from the crate's lid. I sliced through the heavy plastic. It was a professional job, heat-sealed. He had meant for this to stay underwater for a long time. Inside was a thick manila envelope, no markings. I opened the clasp and dumped the contents onto my desk. I expected to see past due notices. I expected to see gambling debts or maybe evidence of an affair. Jason was the type of man who had vices, but what fell out wasn't a foreclosure notice. It was a single thick document bound in blue paper. I put on my reading glasses, my hands trembling slightly. It was a life insurance policy. I read the cover page. Then I read it again. Then I flipped to the terms and conditions, scanning the fine print, with eyes that had read thousands of contracts over the years. It was a term life insurance policy on the life of Emily Thorne. The effective date was 3 days ago. The payout amount was $5 million, and the sole beneficiary was Jason Thorne. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. $5 million. That was why. That was the motive. It wasn't just that he wanted to be free of a sick wife. He wanted a payday. I looked closer at the medical questionnaire attached to the policy. It was filled out in Jason's handwriting, though it was signed with what looked like Emily's signature. But I knew my daughter's hand. Her loops were wide and open. These were tight, jagged, a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. Under the section for pre-existing conditions, he had checked none. He had lied to the insurance company. He claimed she was in perfect health. If she died of this mysterious illness. Now, the insurance company might investigate, but if he made it look like an accident, or if the illness was something he was inducing, my mind raced back to the kitchen. The orange juice, the specific way he insisted she drink it, the way she had deteriorated so quickly, schwass over the last few months, right around the time Jason started talking about investments and future planning. He wasn't just waiting for her to die. He was actively managing the timeline. I flipped to the last page of the document. There was a rider attached, an accelerated death benefit clause, but there was something else clipped to the back, a bank statement. It was an offshore account in the Cayman Islands in Jason's name. The balance was negative. He owed sharks. He owed dangerous people a lot of money. The $5 million wasn't just greed, it was desperation. He was drowning in debt. And he had decided that my daughter was his life raft. I looked at the date on the bank statement. The payment deadline was next week. That was why he tossed the crate. He needed to hide the evidence of the policy until the deed was done. If Emily found this, she would know. If I found this, I would know. So he tried to bury it in the river, weighted down by the body of the only creature that would bark if a stranger came into the room. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of a builder looking at a structure that needed to be demolished. Jason had made a mistake. He thought he had disposed of the evidence. He thought he had silenced the witness. But the witness was currently recovering in a vet clinic 3 miles away, and the evidence was sitting on my desk. I hid the papers back in the wall, careful to make it look undisturbed. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I practiced my cough. I practiced my stoop. Let him think I am weak, I whispered to my reflection. Let him think I am a confused old man who wanders the property at night. I unlocked my bedroom door and went back out into the hallway. I heard Jason's voice coming from the bedroom down the hall. He was on the phone. Don't worry, he was saying, his voice low and urgent. The collateral is secured. The payout is guaranteed. Just give me a few more days. There are complications to iron out. I walked past his door, my footsteps heavy and clumsy on purpose. He stopped talking abruptly. Dad, he called out. Is that you? I leaned against the door frame looking in. He was hastily shoving his phone into his pocket. Just going to the bathroom, Jason. I wheezed. He relaxed, offering me a tight smile. Good. Get some rest, Victor. We have a big week ahead of us. I nodded, shuffling away. You have no idea, Jason, I thought. You have absolutely no idea. That afternoon, the house was filled with the aggressive whirring of the blender. I stood in the hallway, leaning heavily on my cane, watching through the crack in the kitchen door. Jason was making what he called Emily's wellness smoothie. He did this every day at 2 hours sharp. He claimed it was a special recipe he got from a holistic doctor in the city, full of kale spinach and expensive supplements. Emily hated the taste, but she drank it because she trusted him. She drank it because she wanted to live. I watched Jason's back as he stood over the marble counter. He was humming to himself a low, tuneless sound that grated on my nerves. He poured the green sludge into a tall glass. Then he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked amber vial. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the room. I pulled back, instantly pressing myself against the wall, holding my breath. When I risked a peek again, he was using a mortar and pestle to crush 2 small white pills into a fine powder. He tipped the powder into the glass and stirred it vigorously, with a long spoon watching the white dust dissolve into the green. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the mechanism. Suddenly his cell phone rang. It sat on the counter, buzzing angrily. Jason looked at the screen and his posture stiffened. The arrogance dropped from his shoulders, replaced by pure fear. He grabbed the phone and walked quickly toward the sunroom on the far side of the kitchen, his voice a harsh whisper as he answered. "I told you not to call me at the house," he hissed, stepping out of the room. "I am working on the payment. This was my chance." I had prepared for this. Earlier that morning, while Jason was in the shower, I had made a small batch of my own green smoothie, using the same ingredients he left on the counter: spinach, apple, and water. I had poured it into an identical glass and hidden it behind the flour jar in the pantry. I moved into the kitchen. I didn't use the cane. I moved with the silent, efficient speed of a man who used to walk steel beams 40 stories up. I grabbed the poisoned glass from the counter and swapped it with the clean one from the pantry. I poured the contents of Jason's glass into a small screw-top sample jar I had taken from my toolbox, sealed it tight, and shoved it into my pocket. Then I placed the clean glass exactly where the other one had been, creating the same condensation ring on the counter. I was back in the hallway, leaning on my cane and staring blankly at a painting on the wall by the time Jason walked back in. He looked flushed and sweaty. He picked up the glass, gave it one last stir, and headed for the stairs. "Ah, Victor," he said, startled to see me. "You are lurking again." "Just admiring the art, Jason," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. He rolled his eyes and brushed past me. I waited until he was up the stairs. Then I followed, quiet as a shadow. I stood outside Emily's bedroom door and listened. "Here you go, baby," Jason cooped. "Drink it all down. It will help you sleep." I heard Emily make a small noise of protest. "It tastes bitter today, Jay," she said, weaky. "It is the iron supplement," he lied smoothly. "Iron is bitter, but it makes your blood strong. Drink it for me, please." I heard the sound of swallowing. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea hitting me. I had saved her today. She was drinking spinach and apples. But how much of that powder was already in her system? How many days had I watched her wither away thinking it was just bad luck or genetics while he fed her death with a spoon? I needed to get out of the house. I needed to know what was in that jar, burning a hole in my pocket. I waited until Jason went into his home office and closed the door. I grabbed my car keys and slipped out the back. I drove straight to Sarah's clinic. The clinic was quiet in the mid-afternoon. The receptionist knew me and waved me back. I found Sarah in the recovery room checking on a sedated cat. When she saw me, her face grew serious. "How is he?" I asked first. Sarah nodded toward a large kennel in the corner. Buster was awake. He was bandaged and hooked up to an IV, but when he saw me, his tail gave a weak thump against the bedding. I went over and pressed my hand against the wire mesh. He licked my fingers. He was a survivor, just like his owner. "He is stable," Sarah said, walking over. Sarah said, walking. "But we need to talk about his blood work. And Victor, you look like you have seen a ghost." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the jar of green liquid. "I need you to test this," I said. Sarah took the jar, looking at the sludge suspiciously. "What is it?" "It is what Jason is feeding Emily," I said. "He thinks it is medicine. I think it is the reason she is dying." Sarah's face went pale. She looked from the jar to me, then to Buster. "Victor, this isn't a human lab. I can't just run a toxicology screen on a smoothie. You have a mass spectrometer in the back for livestock testing," I said. "I paid for half of it when you expanded the clinic. Remember, you test for lead and pesticides in cattle feed. Please, Sarah, I don't have anywhere else to go. If I go to the police now, they will wait for a warrant. By the time they get one, he could flush everything. I need to know what I am dealing with." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she sighed and nodded. She took the jar and walked toward the lab in the back. "Give me an hour," she said. "Go sit with the dog." I sat on the floor of Opera next to Buster's cage. I told him he was a good boy. I told him we were going to fix this. I told him he was going to run in the park again. I sat there for 45 minutes watching the slow drip of his IV, thinking about the man upstairs in my house who was probably checking his offshore account balance right now, counting the days until he was rich. When the door opened, Sarah didn't walk in. She stood in the frame holding a clipboard. Her hands were shaking. She looked sick. "Victor, come here," she said. I stood up, my knees popping, and walked over to her. She led me into her office and closed the door. She sat down behind her desk and took off her glasses, rubbing her eyes. "I ran the blood panel on Buster first." She said, her voice flat and professional, trying to keep the emotion at bay. "He wasn't just old and tired, Victor. He was drugged. His blood is full of ace-promycin. It is a heavy sedative used for horses and large animals. Jason didn't just throw him in the river. He drugged him so he wouldn't fight back. He made sure the dog was paralyzed before he put him in that box." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It was cruel. It was calculated. "And the smoothie?" I asked. Sarah looked down at the paper in front of her. She took a deep breath. I ran a heavy metal screen. It lit up the board. "Victor." "What is it?" I asked. "It is arsenic," she whispered. The room seemed to tilt. Arsenic. The old widow's poison. Tasteless. Odorless. It mimics natural illness. It causes weakness, confusion, organ failure. It looks like a slow, tragic decline. It is not a massive dose. Sarah continued pointing to the numbers. If it was, she would be dead already. "He is micro-doing her. He is giving her just enough to make her sick to shut down her kidneys and her liver over time. He is killing her by inches, Victor. He is watching her die a little bit every single day and smiling while he does it." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I have to call the police," Sarah said, reaching for the phone. "This is attempted murder." "No," I barked. She froze, hand hovering over the receiver. "Why not Victor?" "He is poisoning your daughter." "Because he will deny it," I said, pacing the small room. "He will say, 'I made the smoothie.' He will say, 'I am a crazy old man who is trying to frame him.' He will say the dog ran away. He has had months to set this up, Sarah. He has painted me as senile to the neighbors, to the doctors. If we go to the police with a jar of green goop and a story he will lawyer up, he will claim Emily is mentally unstable. He will isolate her, and he will finish the job before a trial ever starts." "Then what do we do?" Sarah asked. "We can't let him give her another glass." "He won't," I said. "Not today." I switched the glass. "She drank apples and spinach today. We have a little time." I looked at the toxicology report on the desk. It was proof, but it wasn't enough to put him away for good. I needed to catch him in the act. I needed him to confess, or I needed to catch him doing something undeniable. I thought about the crate in the river. I thought about the insurance policy hidden in my wall. I thought about the deadline on his bank statement. "He is desperate," I said, thinking aloud. "He owes money. He needs that $5 million and he needs it soon. If he thinks he is losing control, if he thinks his plan is failing, he will make a mistake." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "I am going to make him believe that he is losing his mind," I said. "I am going to haunt him." I looked at Sarah. "Can Buster walk?" She hesitated. "He is weak, but yes, he can walk." "I need you to bring him to the house tonight," I said. "Not to the front door, to the old gardening shed in the back. The one Jason is too afraid of spiders to enter." "Victor, that is risky." "He thinks the dog is dead, Sarah. He thinks the dog is at the bottom of the river. If he hears a bark, if he sees a shadow, he won't think it is a dog. He will think it is his conscience coming for him. Or he will think he didn't do a good enough job. Either way, he will panic. And when a man like Jason panics, he gets sloppy." Sarah looked at me, then at the report on her desk. She nodded slowly. I will bring him at midnight, she said. I took the report and folded it, putting it in my pocket next to the sample jar. Thank you, Sarah. You just saved my daughter's life. I drove home slowly, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. My son-in-law wasn't just a thief. He was a cold-blooded killer. He had looked into my daughter's eyes, the woman who loved him, and handed her a glass of poison day after day. I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark except for a light in Jason's office window. He was in there probably calculating how he would spend the money. I gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't going to let him win. I was going to take everything from him, his freedom, his reputation, his future. I got out of the truck and walked to the front door, leaning heavily on my cane, putting on the mask of the frail old man one more time. I walked inside. Jason was coming out of the kitchen holding an empty glass, Emily's glass. She drank every drop, he said, smiling at me. She is sleeping like an angel now. I looked at the glass. I looked at him. That is good, Jason, I said. Sleep is the best medicine. He walked past me whistling. I waited until he was gone. Then I went to the kitchen drawer. I found the spare key to the gardening shed. Tonight the ghosts were coming out to play, and Jason Thorne was going to learn what fear really tasted like. I held the phone in my hand, staring at the number for the police station, my thumb hovering over the call button. Every instinct I had left from 40 years of protecting my family told me to dial it to bring the sirens and the lights to my doorstep and have Jason dragged out in handcuffs. But I couldn't do it, not yet. I looked at the toxicology report Sarah had given me, the paper trembling in my grip. It was proof, yes. But was it enough? Jason was slippery. He was charming. He would tell the police I was a confused old man who had contaminated the sample. He would say I was jealous that I was grieving and lashing out. He would hire expensive lawyers who would tear the evidence apart. And worst of all, the shock might kill Emily. She was so frail, her heart barely beating a rhythm strong enough to keep her upright. If she saw her husband arrested, if she realized the man she loved was trying to murder her, the stress alone could finish the job the arsenic had started. I needed something undeniable. I needed a confession, or I needed to catch him in the act so clearly that even his silver tongue couldn't talk his way out of it. I needed to break him. I put the phone down. I wasn't going to call the law. I was going to become the law. I went out to the garage, moving quietly in the dark. My old toolbox was there, covered in dust. I opened it and rummaged through the bottom until I found what I was looking for. It was Buster's collar. I'd taken it off him at the riverbank before I put him in Sarah's truck almost without thinking. It was a red nylon collar with a brass tag that said his name and our home address. It was still caked with the thick black mud from the bottom of the Chicago River. It smelled of wet fur, algae, and death. It was the perfect artifact for a ghost story. Jason had moved into the guest bedroom down the hall 3 weeks ago. He told Emily it was because he snored and didn't want to disturb her rest. But I knew the truth. He didn't want to watch her die. He didn't want to hear the labored breathing caused by the poison he was feeding her. He wanted to sleep in peace while she faded away in the next room. I waited until 3 in the morning. The house was silent, settling with the groans and creaks of old timber that I knew by heart. I walked down the hallway, not using my cane, stepping on the edges of the floorboards where I knew they wouldn't squeak. I reached the guest room door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open inch by inch, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Jason was asleep, sprawled out on the bed, the moonlight filtering through the curtains, casting a pale glow on his face. He looked peaceful. It made me sick. How could a man sleep so soundly, knowing he had buried a dog alive and was poisoning his wife? I crept to the side of the bed. I was close enough to smell the stale whiskey on his breath. I looked down at him, my hands clenching into fists. It would be so easy. A pillow over the face. A little pressure. I could end it right here. But that wasn't justice. That was murder. And I was not him. I reached out with the collar. I didn't just place it on the nightstand. I placed it right on the pillow next to his head. I pressed it down so the wet river mud stained the expensive Egyptian cotton pillowcase. I arranged it so the brass tag was facing up, catching the sliver of moonlight. Buster. I backed out of the room, leaving the door exactly as I found it. I went back to my room, but I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair staring at the wall, counting the seconds until sunrise. The scream came at 6:30 in the morning. It wasn't a scream of pain, but a shout of pure, unadulterated terror. It echoed through the house, shattering the morning calm. What is this? Who did this? I heard heavy footsteps stomping down the hallway, then the sound of a door slamming. I waited a beat, put on my robe, and shuffled out into the hall, putting on my mask of the confused, weary old man. I made my way downstairs. Jason was in the kitchen cornering our housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. He was holding the muddy collar by the buckle, dangling it in her face like it was a venomous snake. His face was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked like a man who had seen a demon. "Did you put this in my room?" he shouted at her. "Is this your idea of a sick joke?" Mrs. Gable, a stout woman who had been with us for 5 years, looked terrified. She pressed herself against the refrigerator, shaking her head. "Mr. Thorne? I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't been upstairs yet today. I just got here." "Don't lie to me," Jason roared. "It was on my pillow. It is covered in mud." "Who put it there?" I shuffled into the kitchen, leaning heavily on my cane, squinting against the morning light. "What is all the shouting?" I asked, my voice raspy with sleep. "You will wake Emily." Jason spun around to face me. He held the collar up his hand, shaking so hard the brass tag jingled. "Ag. This, Victor, this is what the shouting is about. Do you know how this got into my bed?" I adjusted my glasses, leaning in closer to peer at the object. I let my eyes go wide with recognition, then confusion. "That looks like Buster's collar," I said slowly. "But that doesn't make any sense." "Why doesn't it make sense, Victor?" He snapped, stepping closer, looming over me. "Because Buster is gone, Jason," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You told us he ran away. You told us he went off to die. How could his collar be here if he is gone?" Jason froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at the collar, then at me, then at the back door. I could see the gears turning in his head. He knew he had thrown that dog into the river with the collar on. He knew he had nailed the crate shut. For the collar to be here, one of two things had to be true. Either someone knew what he did and retrieved it, or the dog had somehow come back. He looked at me with suspicion, his eyes narrowing. "You were walking around the other night?" he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You said you were outside." I tapped my cane on the floor, looking bewildered. "I went to the garden, Jason." I looked at the moon. "Are you saying I found the collar? Where would I find it? Did he come back? Is he outside?" I made a move toward the back door, acting hopeful. "Buster?" I called out weakly. "Here, boy." Jason grabbed my arm, stopping me. His grip was painful. "He's not outside, old man. He is dead. He has to be dead." He realized what he said a second too late. He released my arm, stepping back, running a hand through his messy hair. "I mean, he ran away. He wouldn't just leave his collar. Someone is messing with me." He glared at Mrs. Gable, then at me again. He didn't know who to blame. He couldn't blame me without admitting I was sharp enough to pull this off, which would ruin his narrative that I was senile. He couldn't blame the housekeeper because she had no motive. "Maybe you brought it in, Jason," I suggested gently. "Maybe you found it in the yard days ago and forgot." Grief does strange things to the mind. "You've been under a lot of stress with the finances and everything." His head snapped up. "My finances are fine," he spat, "and I am not crazy. I woke up with mud on my face, Victor. Mud that smells like the river. He stopped again. He was trapping himself. I am going to get dressed, he muttered, throwing the collar into the trash can with a violent motion. If I find out who is playing games in this house, they will be out on the street. Do you hear me? He stormed out of the kitchen. I waited until I heard his bedroom door slam upstairs. I walked over to the trash can, retrieved the collar, and slipped it into my pocket. I wasn't done with it yet. Mrs. Gable was still shaking. "I am sorry, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered. "He is so angry lately." "It is okay, Martha," I said, patting her shoulder. "Go check on Emily. I will clean up the mud." I grabbed a paper towel and wiped the floor where Jason had stood, erasing the traces of the river. Then I went to the bottom of the stairs. I needed to hear what he did next. I crept up the first few steps and listened. Jason wasn't in the bedroom. He was in his office down the hall. The door was thin. I could hear him pacing his footsteps, heavy and erratic. Then I heard him dialing his phone. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," he hissed. Finally, someone answered. "It is me." Jason said, his voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. "We have a problem." I strained my ears, leaning forward. "No, listen to me." Something happened. The dog. I think the dog might have gotten out or someone found him. There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. "I don't know how I nailed the damn box shut, but his collar was in my bed this morning on my pillow, wet." He lowered his voice, but the panic made it carry. "I am scared, man. It feels like someone is watching me." "What if the old man knows?" Another pause. "No, he is gone. His brain is mush. He thinks the mailman is his brother half the time." "But maybe he saw something. Or maybe I didn't finish the job right. Look, we need to speed this up. I can't wait 2 weeks for the payout. We need to do it now." My blood ran cold. Speed it up. He was going to accelerate the dosing, or worse, he was going to use something faster than arsenic. I can't live in this house with ghosts. Jason said, "I am going to finish this tomorrow. Tomorrow is her birthday. It is the perfect time. A celebration, a little too much excitement, her heart gives out. It is clean." He hung up. I stood on the stairs, my hand gripping the railing so hard the wood groaned. Tomorrow. He was going to kill my daughter tomorrow. I had 24 hours. I backed down the stairs silently. The game had changed. It wasn't just psychological warfare anymore. It was a race. I needed to make him crack before he could hurt her. I needed to make him so terrified that he would make a mistake in front of everyone. I went into the kitchen and found the spare key to the old gardening shed in the backyard. It was a dusty cobweb fill shack that Jason refused to go near because he hated spiders. It was perfect. I called Sarah. "Bring him tonight," I said. "He is making his move tomorrow. We have to be ready." I spent the rest of the day playing the part of the doddering old father. I sat with Emily, reading to her, watching her fade in and out of consciousness. She looked so pale, so fragile. I held her hand, feeling the weak pulse, and promised her silently that she would see another birthday. Jason spent the day locked in his office. He only came out for dinner looking haggarded and jumpy. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at the spot where the dog bowl used to be. That night at midnight, I met Sarah by the back fence. She had Buster on a leash. He was limping slightly and he had a bandage around his midsection, but his eyes were bright. When he saw me, he didn't bark. He just leaned his weight against my leg. He knew dogs always know. We snuck him into the gardening shed. I made him a bed of old blankets and gave him water and food. "Stay quiet, boy," I whispered, "just for a little longer." I walked back to the house, leaving the shed door slightly unlocked. I needed sound. I needed movement. I went to the garage and found an old baby monitor I had kept from when my grandson visited years ago. I hid the transmitter in the shed with Buster. I took the receiver into the house and hid it in the air vent right outside Jason's bedroom door. Then I went to my room and waited. Around 2 hours in the morning, Buster started to whine. It was a low, mournful sound amplified by the tiny speaker of the baby monitor in the vent. It drifted down the hallway ghostly and distorted. I heard Jason's bed springs creak. I heard his footsteps approach the door. The whine turned into a scratch. The sound of claws on wood. No. I heard Jason whisper from the hallway. It's not real. I turned the volume up on the receiver just a notch. A bark sharp and clear. Jason let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. I heard him running down the hall, checking the locks, checking the windows. He was unraveling. Tomorrow I thought closing my eyes. Tomorrow everyone will see who you really are. The next morning the tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. I came downstairs to find Jason looming over Emily in the living room. She was sitting in her wheelchair, a blanket tucked around her legs, looking smaller and frailer than I had ever seen her. On the coffee table in front of her sat a stack of legal documents. Jason was holding a pen, thrusting it toward her hand. "Just sign the papers, Emily." He said, his voice tight with a mixture of impatience and desperation. "We have been over this. You've been over. The medical bills are piling up. The insurance isn't covering the new treatments. We need liquidity." Emily was crying silent tears tracking through the gray pallor of her cheeks. "But it is Dad's house, Jason," she whispered. "He built it. He gave it to us. I can't just sell it out from under him." "Where will he go?" "He can go to a facility," Jason snapped, losing his composure. "A place where professionals can watch him. Look at him, Emily. He is losing his mind. He wanders at night. He forgets things. This house is too big, too dangerous for him, and it is an asset we are wasting. We sell the house, we pay for your treatment, and we put him somewhere safe. It is the only way." I stood in the doorway, my grip on my cane tightening until the wood creaked. He was trying to liquidate everything. He wanted to strip the meat off the bone before he discarded the carcass. He wanted to sell the home I built with my own 2 hands, the home where my wife died, to pay off his gambling debts before he murdered my daughter for the insurance payout. I took a deep breath, forcing my face into a mask of confused compliance. I shuffled into the room. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice wavering. "Why is everyone shouting?" Jason spun around, his eyes flashing with annoyance. "Nobody is shouting, Victor. We are discussing finances. Something you don't need to worry about." Emily looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Dad, he wants to sell the house." I looked at the papers, then at Jason. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. He was running out of time. His creditors were calling. He needed money now today, not in 2 weeks. When the insurance check cleared, I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at my shoes, then back at Jason. Maybe Jason is right, Emily," I said softly. Emily gasped. Jason looked at me stunned. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said you are right," I repeated, looking at him with watery, trusting eyes. "I am getting old, Jason. I forget things. I leave the stove on. I get lost in the hallway. Maybe I do need to go to a home." Jason's face relaxed, a predatory smile touching his lips. "Exactly, Victor. See, Emily, even your father agrees. It is the responsible thing to do. But I am worried about the money." I continued, interrupting his victory lap. "Selling the house takes time. Inspections, closings, it takes months." Jason frowned. "I can expedite it. I have a buyer lined up. A cash buyer." I shook my head slowly. "That is good, but I don't want you to sell the house for pennies just because we are in a rush. You know, I have been thinking. I probably should have told you this before, but I forgot. My memory isn't what it used to be." "Told us what Jason asked his patients fraying about the safety deposit box," I said. The room went silent. Jason took a step toward me. "What safety deposit box, Victor? The one at First National?" I said, scratching my head as if trying to recall a distant memory. I put it there years ago after I sold the construction business. I didn't trust the markets, you know. So I converted my retirement savings into cash large bills. I put it in the box and just left it there. Jason was staring at me like I had just grown a second head. His greed was practically radiating off him in waves. How much, Victor? He asked, his voice trembling. How much is in the box? I think it was around $500 to $1,000, I said. Maybe a little more. I watched the numbers flash in his eyes. $500 to $1,000 immediate cash, untraceable. It was enough to pay off his sharks. It was enough to buy him breathing room. It was enough to make him pause his murder plot. $500,000, he repeated, licking his lips. And you have the key. I patted my pockets, frowning. I have it somewhere, I think. Or maybe I lost it. I would need to go to the bank to sign for a new one. They know me there, but I don't drive anymore. My eyes are bad. Jason dropped the pen on the table. The house sale papers were suddenly forgotten. Why wait for a real estate closing when there was $500,000 sitting in a box waiting to be plucked? I can drive you, he said quickly. I can take you today, right now. I looked at the clock on the mantel. Oh, not today, Jason. I am tired. My hip hurts. And I need to find my identification. I think I left it in the attic, or maybe the basement. It will take me all day to find it. Jason looked like he wanted to scream, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't force me. He needed me to sign. Okay, he said. His voice strained. Okay. You find your ID today. We will go tomorrow morning. First thing when the bank opens. Tomorrow, I agreed. That sounds nice. A little outing. Jason turned back to Emily. He picked up the papers for the house sale and folded them. We can hold off on this, he said to her. If Victor has this money, we don't need to sell the house yet. We can use his savings for your treatment. It is what he wants. Emily looked at me, confusion and gratitude wearing in her face. Dad, are you sure? She asked. That is your life savings. I walked over and kissed her forehead. Anything for you, princess. Anything to see you get better. I looked at Jason over her head. Anything? I repeated. Jason was practically vibrating with excitement. He had won the lottery. He thought he had manipulated a senile old man into handing over a fortune. He didn't know he had just swallowed the hook, line, and sinker. I'm going to go look for that ID. I said it might take me a while. I might need to go check the storage unit in town. I think I left a box of papers there. I will drive you. Jason offered instantly. No, I said you stay with Emily. She needs you. I will call a cab. I need the walk. He hesitated. He didn't want to let me out of his sight, but he also didn't want to seem too eager. And he was terrified of leaving Emily alone in case she got better or in case she figured something out. Fine, he said, but be back by dinner. We have a big day tomorrow. I walked out of the house, feeling his eyes boring into my back. I called a cab, but I didn't go to a storage unit. I went to the one place Jason would never think to look. I went to the law offices of Kowalski and Associates. Stan Kowalski was a man cut from the same cloth as me. We had played poker together every Thursday night for 20 years until my wife got sick. He was a disbarred linebacker turned estate attorney, a man who looked like a bulldog and fought like one too. I sat in his office surrounded by the smell of old leather and cigar smoke. I told him everything. I told him about the crate, the poison, the insurance policy, and the lie about the safety deposit box. Stan listened, his face turning a shade of purple that usually meant someone was about to get hurt. So let me get this straight, Victor, he growled. You told this scumbag you have $500,000 in cash so he wouldn't kill your daughter today. Exactly, I said. I bought her 24 hours. But I need to end this tomorrow. What do you need from me? Stan asked. I need a new will, I said. I want everything the house, my savings, my pension, everything put into an irrevocable trust for Emily with you as the executive. If I die, if I have an accident on the stairs, Jason gets nothing, not a dime. And I want a clause that says, if Emily dies under suspicious circumstances, the entire estate goes to the local dog shelter. Stan typed furiously. Done. What else I need a wire, I said. Stan stopped typing. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Victor, this isn't a cop show. In Illinois, you need two-party consent to record a conversation legally. I don't care about court admissibility for the money, Stan. I said I care about saving her life. I need him to admit what he is doing. I need him to say it out loud so Emily hears it so the police have probable cause to tear that house apart and find the poison. Stan sighed. He opened his desk drawer and rummaged around. He pulled out a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen. This is a dictaphone. He said digital holds 12 hours of audio, high-sensitivity microphone. I use it for depositions. You twist the cap to start recording. He slid it across the desk. If anyone asks you bought it at a spy shop, I never gave it to you. I took the pen. It felt heavy, substantial. Thank you, Stan. One more thing, Victor, Stan said, his voice softening. Be careful. A man like that. A man who hurts dogs and poisons his wife. If he realizes he is cornered, he is going to come at you. And he is 30 years younger than you. I put the pen in my pocket. He might be younger, Stan, but he has never had to fight for his life. I have. I left the office and walked to the bank. I didn't have $500,000 in a box. I had about $4,000 in a savings account, but I did have a safety deposit box. It was empty except for my wife's old engagement ring and a few savings bonds. I asked the teller to let me into the vault. I spent 10 minutes in the private room. I took a stack of blank paper I had brought from Stan's office and cut it into the size of banknotes. I put a real $100 bill on the top of the stack and one on the bottom. I wrapped it in a bank band I asked the teller for. I made 10 bundles. From a distance in dim light, it looked like a fortune. I put the bundles in the box and locked it. The trap was set. I returned home just as the sun was setting. Jason was waiting for me in the hallway, pacing like a caged tiger. Did you find it? He asked, not even saying hello. I patted my chest pocket. Right here, Jason found it in an old coat at the bottom of a trunk. He let out a breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. Good. Good. We will go at 9 tomorrow. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. You are doing a good thing, Victor, he said. You are helping your family. I gripped the pen in my pocket, fighting the urge to smash his teeth in. I know Jason, I said. I am doing exactly what needs to be done. That night the house was quiet, but it was the quiet before a storm. I lay in my bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the sounds of the house. I heard Jason go into Emily's room. I heard him murmur something. I prayed he wasn't giving her anything else. I heard him go back to his room. I heard the click of his door. I waited an hour. Then I got up. I needed to check on Emily. I needed to make sure she was still breathing. I crept into her room. The moonlight washed over her face. She looked like a wax doll, pale and still. I put my hand in front of her nose and felt the faint, warm puff of air. She was alive. I sat in the chair by her bed, the same chair Buster used to sleep beside. Tomorrow, I whispered to her. Tomorrow the nightmare ends. I didn't sleep. I sat guard until the sun came up. At 8 near in the morning, Jason was already dressed. He was wearing his best suit. He looked like he was going to a coronation. Ready, Victor? He asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. I ate my toast, slowly making him wait. Just let me finish my coffee, Jason. What is the rush? The bank opens at 9:00, he said, through gritted teeth. We want to beat the line. I finished my coffee. I stood up leaning on my cane. I checked my pocket. The pen was there. Let's go, I said. We walked out to his car. He opened the door for me, a mockery of chivalry. As we drove toward the bank, Jason turned on the radio. He was humming along to the music. He thought he had won. He thought he was minutes away from financial freedom. He didn't know he was driving toward his own destruction. Jason? I said, reaching into my pocket and twisting the cap of the pen. Yeah, Victor, I have been thinking. Before we get this money, I want to make sure Emily is taken care of. She will be, he said dismissively. That is what the money is for. I know, I said. But I was wondering what happens if the treatments don't work. Jason glanced at me, his eyes narrowing. Why would you say that? Because she seems to be getting worse, I said. Ever since you started making those smoothies. The car swerved slightly. Jason gripped the wheel. That is the illness, Victor. It gets worse before it gets better. I looked out the window, watching the city pass by. It is funny, I said. Buster got sick too right before he ran away. Jason went rigid. Dogs get sick, Victor. People get sick. Stop overthinking it. We are almost at the bank. We pulled into the parking lot. Jason turned off the car. He turned to me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Let's go get that box, Victor, and then we can stop worrying about everything. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had poisoned my life. After you, Jason, I said. We stood in the lobby of First National, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like a headache. I leaned heavily on my cane, putting on a show of patting my pockets, frowning, and muttering to myself. Jason was vibrating with impatience next to me, checking his watch every 10 seconds. I told him I couldn't remember which safety deposit box it was. Was it 404 or 402? I told him I needed to speak to the manager, Mr. Henderson, but the teller said Mr. Henderson was in a meeting. I sat down on the velvet bench near the door and rubbed my temples, complaining about the air conditioning being too cold and my memory being like a sieve. I saw the vein in Jason's temple throb. He looked like he wanted to drag me into the vault by my collar, but there were cameras everywhere, and he had to play the part of the beautiful son-in-law. He finally snapped. He told me to sit there and try to remember the number while he stepped outside for fresh air. I knew exactly what that meant. He needed a cigarette, and he needed to make a call. As soon as the glass doors slid shut behind him, the confused old man act dropped from my face. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone and a pair of earbuds. I had synced the digital recorder Stan gave me to a cloud app, a little piece of modern magic that allowed me to listen in real time if the device was within range. And Jason was standing right outside, leaning against his car, the very car where I'd slipped the transmitter under the driver's seat earlier that morning while he was in the shower. I put the earbud in and tapped the screen. The audio crackled to life, crystal clear. I heard the flick of a lighter, the sharp inhale of smoke, and then the ringing of a phone. A woman answered. Her voice was sultry, impatient. She asked him where the money was. Jason's voice came through dripping with that arrogant confidence that made my stomach turn. He told her to just wait 2 more days. He said the old man was about to cough up the cash, that I was practically handing it to him on a silver platter. Then he said the words that made the world stop spinning. He said, "My wife is about to go meet her dog." He laughed. He actually laughed. He said after the funeral, after the dust settled and the checks cleared, they would be on a first-class flight to the Maldives. I sat there on that bank bench, my hand gripping the handle of my cane so hard that I felt the skin on my palm split. A warm trickle of blood ran down the wood, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt nothing but a cold, dark abyss opening up inside me. I closed my eyes and I was back in the church 7 years ago. I saw Emily in her white dress looking like an angel, her eyes shining with love and trust. I saw myself walking her down the aisle, the pride swelling in my chest so big I thought I would burst. I remembered placing her hand in Jason's. I remembered the look he gave me, the firm handshake, the promise he made to love and cherish her, to protect her with his life. I had handed my most precious treasure to a butcher. I had welcomed a wolf into my sheepfold and fed him at my table. The recording continued. He was talking about the dosage. He was saying how Emily was getting weaker, how she could barely lift her head this morning. He called her pathetic. He called me a senile old fool who was making it too easy. Every word was a lash, a physical blow to my soul. But beneath the pain, something else was forging itself. It was the steel I used to put into the foundations of skyscrapers. It was hard, unyielding, and cold. I wiped the blood from my hand onto my trousers. I took the earbud out and put the phone away. I didn't need to hear anymore. I had heard enough to send him to prison for the rest of his miserable life. I had heard enough to know that there was no redemption for Jason Thorne. No mercy, no second chance. I watched him through the glass doors. He stomped his cigarette out on the pavement, checked his reflection in the car window, and fixed his tie. He put the mask of the loving husband back on and walked toward the bank entrance. I took a deep breath, composing my face back into the mask of the frail, forgetful Victor. But inside, the fire was raging. He thought he was walking back in to collect his winnings. He didn't know he was walking into a cage I had spent the last 24 hours building. When he came back inside, I smiled at him. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I told him I remembered the number. I told him I was ready. He looked relieved, almost giddy. He patted my shoulder, that false, patronizing touch that made my skin crawl. He said, "We were almost there." He was right. We were almost there, but we were going to two very different destinations. He was heading toward a payday he would never see. I was heading toward a reckoning. As we walked toward the vault, I made a silent vow to my daughter, to my dead wife, and to the dog that had survived against all odds. Tomorrow was Emily's birthday. It was supposed to be the day she died. Instead, it was going to be the day she got her life back. It was going to be the day Jason Thorne learned that you do not touch a Caldwell. You do not hurt my family. I had the evidence. I had the toxicology report. I had the insurance policy. And now I had his voice confessing everything. It was done. The trap was sprung. All that was left was to close the jaws. I looked at the back of his neck as he walked in front of me, so sure of himself, so arrogant. Enjoy it, Jason, I thought. Enjoy this last day of freedom, because tomorrow I am going to burn your world to ash, and I am going to watch you choke on the smoke. The bank manager led us to the metal gate. I stepped through my cane, tapping a rhythm on the tile floor. It sounded like a countdown. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Your time is up, son. The night air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of impending rain, as I waited by the back garage door. It was 11:30 at night on the eve of my daughter's 33rd birthday. According to Jason, it was supposed to be her last birthday, the day she would tragically succumb to her mysterious illness during a celebration of her life. But as I stood there in the shadows of the house I built with my own hands, I knew that the only thing dying tomorrow would be Jason Thorne's freedom. I saw the headlights of Sarah's truck flash once from the end of the alleyway, the signal we had agreed upon. I disarmed the security system using the code Jason thought I had forgotten months ago and slipped out into the darkness. Sarah was waiting by the back fence holding a leash. At the end of it stood Buster. He looked different than he had the night I pulled him from the river. His golden fur was clean and dry, though patches were shaved where the IVs had been. He was thinner, and he walked with a slight limp, favoring his back left leg, but his eyes were bright and alert. When he saw me, he didn't make a sound. He just pressed his head against my thigh and let out a long, shuddering breath. It broke my heart and steeled my resolve all at the same time. "We have to be quiet," I whispered to Sarah. "He is upstairs in the office." Sarah handed me the leash and a small bag of treats. "He is ready, Victor," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "He knows he is home." I took the leash and led Buster into the garage. He hesitated at the threshold, remembering the last time he was here, remembering the man who had dragged him out to the car. I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees, and cupped his face in my hands. "You're safe now," I told him. "You are with me. We are going to fix this." We moved through the garage and into the mudroom. I wiped his paws with an old towel so he wouldn't leave tracks. The house was silent, settling with the familiar groans of timber and brick that I knew better than the lines on my own face. I led Buster to the service staircase, the narrow flight of stairs behind the kitchen that led up to the second floor near the linen closet. It was steeper than the main staircase, and I had to carry him part of the way, my muscles straining under his weight, but it was necessary. The main stairs creaked on the third step. These stairs were solid. We reached the second floor landing. The hallway stretched out before us, bathed in shadows. A strip of yellow light spilled from under the door of Jason's office. I could hear him pacing inside, the rhythmic thud of his shoes on the carpet. He was agitated. He was probably thinking about the money, about the fake cash he had seen in the bank vault, about the debt collectors who were breathing down his neck. I looked down at Buster. He was staring at the office door, a low growl building in his throat. I placed a hand on his neck to quiet him. "Not yet," I signaled. I led him down the hall toward the master bedroom, where I had been sleeping since the guest room became Jason's domain. But before we went in, I stopped. I needed Jason to hear something. I needed to twist the knife of paranoia one last time before the trap snapped shut. I unclipped the leash. I pointed to the spot on the hardwood floor right outside my bedroom door, a spot where the rug didn't cover the wood. "Walk," I whispered. Buster took 2 steps. Click, click. The sound of his nails on the wood was unmistakable. It was a sound that had filled this house for 12 years. A sound that Jason thought he had silenced forever at the bottom of the Chicago River. The pacing in the office stopped instantly. I signaled Buster again. He took 2 more steps, circling before sitting down. Click, click, scrape. The office door flew open. I grabbed Buster's collar and dragged him into my room, closing the door as softly as I could, leaving it just a hairbreadth open. I hustled him into the back of my walk-in closet, pushing him behind a row of my old winter coats. "Stay!" I commanded, my voice a thread of sound. I stripped off my robe and slippers and slid into bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin. I forced my breathing to slow, forced my body to go limp. I heard Jason in the hallway. He wasn't walking, he was stalking. And then I heard a sound that made the hair on my arm stand up, the metallic slide of something dragging against the wall. He had a baseball bat. I knew he kept one behind his desk. He was standing right outside my door. I could hear his breathing, heavy and ragged like a man who had just run a sprint. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracked. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered him. The house held its breath. I heard him take a step closer. He pushed my bedroom door open. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor, the dresser, the empty chair. Then the light hit my face. I didn't flinch. I kept my mouth slightly open, letting out a soft, rhythmic snore. I was the picture of a senile old man deep in a medicated sleep. The light lingered on my face for a long, uncomfortable minute. I could feel the heat of his gaze, the desperate desire to find someone to blame, someone to hurt. But he couldn't hurt a sleeping old man. Not without a reason. Not when he was so close to the finish line. The light swept away, moving toward the closet. My heart slammed against my ribs. If he opened that closet door, if he saw the dog he thought was dead, the game was over. He would kill us both right there. He wouldn't have a choice. The beam of light hit the closet door handle. I heard his footsteps move toward it. The floorboard creaked under his weight. "Please, Buster." I prayed silently. "Don't make a sound." Jason's hand touched the knob. I could hear the brass mechanism rattle slightly. Then from outside, a tree branch scraped against the window pane, driven by a sudden gust of wind. It was a loud scratching screech. Jason spun around, swinging the bat at the window in a reflex of pure terror. He didn't hit the glass, but he stumbled back, breathing hard. "You are losing it, Jason," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling in the dark. "You're losing your damn mind. It is just the wind. It is just the stress." He lowered the bat. He cast one last look at me sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the monster in the room. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the sweat that I knew was slicking his forehead. "Get a grip," he hissed. "Just one more day." He backed out of the room, pulling the door shut. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall, but he didn't go back to his office. He went past it. He was heading for the stairs. I waited 10 seconds, then threw off the covers. I went to the closet and gave Buster a quick scratch behind the ears to reassure him. Then I grabbed my tablet from the nightstand. I had installed the app that linked to the hidden camera in the kitchen only yesterday. I sat on the edge of the bed and tapped the screen. The black and white feed flickered to life. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the light over the stove and the glow of the open refrigerator door. Jason was there. He had abandoned the bat on the kitchen island. He was standing in front of the open fridge, staring into it, as if looking for answers. He grabbed a bottle of water and downed half of it in one gulp, water, spilling down his chin and onto his expensive shirt. He wiped it away roughly with the back of his hand. He looked terrible. His eyes were wild, dark circles, bruising the skin beneath them. He looked like a man who was being hunted by invisible demons. He set the water down and reached into the back of the pantry behind the cereal boxes. He pulled out the amber vial, the poison. He walked to the counter right in front of where I had hidden the camera in the spice rack. The angle was perfect. I could see his face clearly. I could see the sweat dripping from his nose. I could see the madness. He opened the vial. He took a mortar and pestle from the drawer. He didn't take out 2 pills this time. He dumped the entire contents of the vial into the bowl. 10, maybe 15 pills. "You want to haunt me?" He muttered, his voice tinny through the tablet speakers. "You want to scratch at the floors? Fine. Let's see how much noise you make when she is gone." He began to grind the pills. He ground them with a violence that was terrifying to watch. He mashed them into a fine white powder, putting his whole body weight into the motion. "I am not crazy," he said, panting. "I am not crazy. I am rich. I am going to be rich, and you are all going to be gone. The dog, the wife, the old man, gone." He took a small glass jar from his pocket and poured the massive pile of powder into it. He sealed it and gave it a little shake. "Happy birthday, Emily." He whispered, a sick smile twisting his lips. He put the jar in his pocket and leaned against the counter, closing his eyes, trying to calm his breathing. I hit the record button on the screen, saving the clip. I had it. I had the intent. I had the preparation. I had the weapon. I watched him stand there for a moment longer, composing himself. Putting the mask of sanity back on, he smoothed his hair, he straightened his shirt. He picked up the bat and turned off the kitchen light. I put the tablet away and went back to the closet. I sat on the floor with Buster wrapping my arms around his neck. "We got him, buddy," I whispered into his fur. "We got him." Tomorrow was going to be a bloodbath, but it wasn't going to be the one Jason Thorne expected. He thought he was walking into a funeral. He didn't know he was walking into an execution, and I was the one holding the axe. The following evening, my house had been transformed into a stage for Jason's grand performance. He had hired a catering company that bustled through the kitchen, arranging trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres that my daughter was too sick to eat. He had filled the living room with lees, their heavy, clawing scent, reminding me more of a funeral parlor than a birthday party. That was likely the point. He had invited 30 people. Half of them were his business associates, men in sharp suits, with shark smiles who looked at the furniture as if appraising its auction value. The other half were neighbors and friends of Emily's good people, who stood in hushed clusters, looking at my daughter with pity in their eyes. They were the audience Jason needed. They were the witnesses who would testify later that he was a devoted, heartbroken husband who did everything he could to save his dying wife. I sat in the corner on a stiff armchair, gripping my cane with both hands, my knuckles white. I wore my best suit, the one I hadn't worn since Martha's funeral. To the guests, I was just part of the scenery, the senile old father-in-law who stared into space and occasionally mumbled to himself. They nodded at me politely and then turned their backs, dismissing me entirely. That was their mistake. From my vantage point, I saw everything. I saw the way Jason checked his watch every PS. I saw the sheen of sweat on his upper lip that no amount of air conditioning could dry. I saw the way his eyes darted to the front door, then to the kitchen, then to Emily, vibrating with a nervous energy that he tried to disguise as concern. Emily sat in her wheelchair near the fireplace, a blanket draped over her lap. She looked beautiful in a tragic, fading way. Her skin was translucent, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. She was smiling at her friends, but I could see the exhaustion pulling at the corners of her mouth. She was fighting to stay awake, fighting to be present for the husband she adored. She didn't know she was the guest of honor at her own execution. Around 8:00, the chatter in the room grew louder. Jason clapped his hands, calling for attention. The room fell silent. He stood in the center of the living room, a spotlight of his own making. He looked every inch the grieving hero. He held a crystal glass in one hand and a small, decorative bottle in the other. "Thank you all for coming," Jason said, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "It means the world to Emily and me to have you here. You all know that this has been a difficult year." He paused, looking down at the floor as if overcome. A woman near me sniffled. He had them. He had them all eating out of the palm of his hand. "But tonight isn't about sickness," he continued, lifting his head bravely. "Tonight is about life. It is about celebrating the strongest, most beautiful woman I know, my wife, Emily." There was a polite ripple of applause. Emily blushed, looking down at her hands. Jason walked over to the small bar cart he had set up next to her chair. I tensed. This was it. "My friends," he said, pouring a thick, cloudy liquid from the decorative bottle into a fresh glass. "You all have champagne, but Emily has something special. The doctors say she can't have alcohol, but I wasn't going to let her toast with water. This is a special blend of herbs and nutrients prepared just for her to give her strength to help her fight." He held the glass up to the light. It looked innocent. It looked like a health drink, but I knew what was in it. I had watched him grind 15 pills into powder last night. I had the video on my tablet tucked safely inside my jacket. That glass wasn't a toast. It was a massive overdose of sedatives and arsenic designed to stop her heart before the cake was cut. He knelt beside her wheelchair, presenting the glass like a chalice. "To you, my love," he whispered loud enough for the room to hear. "To another year." Emily reached out. Her hand trembled. She took the glass. She looked at him with such pure, unadulterated love that I felt my heart break in my chest. She raised the glass to her lips. The room held its breath. Jason watched her, his eyes intense, hungry. He was seconds away from his 5 million. He was seconds away from freedom. I didn't stand up slowly. I didn't use my cane to push myself up. I didn't groan or wheeze. I surged out of that armchair with the explosive power of a man who used to swing sledgehammers for a living. I crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Stop!" I roared. The word hit the room like a physical blow. Emily froze the glass inches from her mouth. Jason spun around, his eyes wide with shock. The guests gasped, turning to stare at the crazy old man who had just disrupted the touching moment. "Dad!" Emily whispered, frightened. "What is wrong?" Jason recovered first. He stood up, putting himself between me and Emily, his face twisting into a mask of concern that didn't quite cover the panic underneath. "Victor, please," he said, reaching out as if to steady me. "You are confused again." "It is okay. Why don't we go upstairs and get you your medication?" He tried to grab my arm. He expected frail bones and weak muscles. He expected the old man he had bullied for 6 months. I grabbed his wrist. I squeezed. I felt the bones grind together. Jason yelped, his knees buckling under the pressure. I shoved him backward hard. He stumbled and fell against the bar cart, sending bottles crashing to the floor. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Someone shouted for help. "I am not confused, Jason," I boomed. My voice wasn't raspy anymore. It was deep and commanding, the voice that used to bark orders over the sound of jackhammers and cranes. It was the voice of Victor Caldwell, the builder, the father, the protector. I snatched the glass from Emily's hand. She looked at me, terrified, confused. "Dad," she cried, "you are scaring me." "I am sorry, sweetheart," I said, my voice softening for her, but never leaving Jason's face. "I am sorry I waited this long." "But you are not drinking that." Jason scrambled to his feet, straightening his jacket. He looked around at the guests, trying to salvage the narrative. "He has snapped," Jason shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Call 911. He is violent. He is having an episode. He is dangerous." I turned to the crowd. I held the glass up. "You want to know what is dangerous?" I asked them. "It isn't me. It is what is in this glass. It is the poison this man just tried to feed my daughter." "Poison," someone whispered. The murmur grew louder. Jason laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "That is insane. It is a smoothie. He is hallucinating. Look at him. He is senile. He thinks the mailman is his brother. He wanders the yard at night looking for ghosts." He turned to Emily, his eyes pleading. "Baby, tell them. Tell them how he has been. He needs help." Emily looked at me, doubt clouding her eyes. She had seen me acting strange for months. She had seen the decline. Jason had played us both perfectly. "Dad, please," she said. "Sit down." I looked at Jason. He was smiling again, just a little. He thought he had won. He thought his lie was stronger than my truth. "You think I am seeing ghosts, Jason?" I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You think I am imagining things?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the wireless microphone I had taken from the DJ stand earlier. I flipped the switch. My voice filled the room, amplified and undeniable. "You told me the dog ran away, Jason. You told me he went off to die because he was old." I stepped closer to him. He backed away, hitting the fireplace mantel. "I buried him." Jason hissed too low for the mic, but I heard him. "I buried that box." "So you admit there was a box?" I said into the microphone. He turned pale. "I didn't say that. You are crazy." I turned to the double doors that led to the hallway. "I might be old, Jason. I might be tired, but I am not a liar. And I am not a killer." I pointed at the doors. "Before you drink to my daughter's health, I have a special guest who wants to wish her a happy birthday. A guest you worked very hard to make disappear." I nodded to the back of the room. "Now, Sarah." The double doors burst open. The sound was like a thunderclap. Sarah stood there looking fierce and imposing. And by her side, held by a sturdy red leash, stood a golden retriever with a shaved patch on his leg and a bandage around his ribs. Buster looked into the room. He saw the crowd. He saw the lights. And then he saw Emily. He let out a bark that shook the chandelier. He pulled against the leash, his claws scrambling for purchase on the hardwood floor. Emily screamed. It was a scream of pure, impossible joy. "Buster!" she shrieked. "Oh my God, Buster!" Sarah let go of the leash. Buster didn't run. He flew. He bolted across the room, a golden blur of love and loyalty. He reached the wheelchair and buried his head in Emily's lap, whining and licking her hands, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Emily buried her face in his fur, sobbing uncontrollably. The guests were stunned into silence. Some were crying. I turned back to Jason. He was pressed against the wall, his face the color of old ash. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who was watching his own funeral, how he mouthed, how I stepped up to him, invading his personal space, towering over him. Because I didn't sleep, Jason. I said, my voice cold as the river. I watched you. I saw you throw that crate into the water and I jumped in after it. I pulled out my tablet from my inside jacket pocket. I tapped the screen and held it up. The video of him in the kitchen grinding the pills played in high definition. His voice muttering about being rich and everyone being gone echoed through the silent room. I held the tablet up so the guests could see, so his business partners could see, so Emily could see. The room erupted. People were shouting. Someone was calling the police. Jason looked at the screen, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a cornered rat. He lunged for the sliding glass door that led to the patio. He was going to run. Not on my watch, I growled. I didn't need the cane. I hooked it around his ankle and yanked. Jason went down hard, face planting, onto the expensive Persian rug. I put my boot in the center of his back and pressed down, pinning him to the floor. You aren't going anywhere, son. I said, we are just getting started. The room exploded into chaos, a symphony of gasps and overturned chairs, as 30 people recoiled in collective shock. Emily let out a cry that tore through the suffocating atmosphere of the party. A sound so raw and filled with disbelief that it silenced the murmurs instantly. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her knuckles white, and for the first time in months, she found the strength to push herself up. Her legs were weak, trembling violently under her weight. But she didn't care. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees on the hardwood floor just as Buster reached her. The dog crashed into her, a golden avalanche of fur and desperate affection. He whined high in his throat, licking the tears from her face, pressing his bandaged body against hers as if trying to merge their souls back together. It was a reunion so pure, so undeniably real, that it shattered every lie Jason had carefully constructed over the last 6 months. I watched Jason. He stood frozen by the fireplace, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure melting under heat. The crystal glass in his hand, the one filled with the lethal cocktail he had toasted with only moments ago, slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the floor with a sharp, ugly shatter. The liquid splashed across his polished Italian shoes and soaked into the expensive Persian rug, a dark, spreading stain that looked too much like blood. He took a stumbling step back, his eyes fixed on the dog he thought he had murdered. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. I stepped closer, close enough to hear the words tumbling out of him in a breathless, terrified whisper. Terrified. It is impossible. He stammered, his voice shaking so hard it was barely audible. I nailed it shut. I put rocks in it. I watched it sink. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the ghost he thought had come back to haunt him. He was confessing to the air, too shocked to realize that the room had gone deadly silent, that every ear was straining to hear him. I didn't give him time to recover. I didn't give him time to spin a new lie or claim this was a different dog. I turned my back on him and walked to the small table where the projector sat, the one Jason had set up to show a slideshow of happy memories photos designed to manipulate the guests into seeing him as the grieving, devoted husband. I pulled the HDMI cable from his laptop and plugged it into my tablet. The screen behind me, which had been displaying a photo of Jason and Emily on their honeymoon, flickered and went black for a heartbeat. Then a new image filled the wall, massive and grainy in the low light of the night vision camera. "Look at the screen," I commanded, my voice booming through the microphone I still held. "Look at the man you came here to celebrate." The video played. It was dark, but the image was unmistakable. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 a.m. I womb 3 nights ago. The footage showed the back of my property, the overgrown path leading to the river. A figure struggled into the frame dragging a heavy wooden crate. The man stopped wiping sweat from his brow, his face illuminated briefly by the moonlight. It was Jason. There was no denying it. The camera captured him, looking around paranoid and furtive, before he shoved the crate into the black water. The splash echoed through the speakers, a heavy final sound. Then he dusted off his hands, a gesture of casual cruelty that made the guests gasp in horror. Jason let out a strangled noise, backing away until he hit the wall. "That is not real," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "That is deep fake. He made it up. He is crazy." But I wasn't done. I swiped the screen. The video changed. This one was crystal clear and full color. It was from last night, the kitchen. The angle was perfect, capturing Jason standing at the counter, the amber vial in his hand. The audio was crisp, picking up the grinding sound of the mortar and pestle as he crushed the pills into a fine white powder. The room watched in horrified silence as Jason on the screen poured the powder into a jar and whispered the words that would seal his fate. "Happy birthday, Emily?" The video ended freezing on Jason's smiling, sadistic face. A woman in the front row screamed. Emily, still on the floor with Buster, looked up at the screen, her eyes wide with a horror that transcended betrayal. She looked at the video, then at the husband she had defended, the man she had trusted with her life. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She didn't scream. She just stared at him, her heart breaking into a million pieces right there on the floor. Jason looked around the room. He saw the disgust on the faces of his business partners. He saw the anger in the eyes of the neighbors. He saw the cell phones coming out, people dialing 911. The illusion was gone. The mask had been ripped off and the monster underneath was exposed for everyone to see. He looked at me last. His eyes were wild, feral. There was no more pretense of concern, no more act of the loving son-in-law. There was only pure, unadulterated hatred. "You ruined everything," he hissed, spitting the words at me. "You useless old relic, you should have just died." He lunged, but not at me. He saw the sliding glass door leading to the patio and the dark lawn beyond. It was his only way out. He scrambled toward it, slipping on the wet rug where the poisoned drink had spilled, regaining his balance with a desperate scramble. He thought he could outrun an old man. He thought I was slow. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. I'd spent 40 years on construction sites anticipating accidents before they happened. I knew exactly where he was going. I took one step to the side and swung my heavy oak cane in a low, brutal arc. The wood connected with his shins with a sickening crack. Jason screamed as his legs were swept out from under him. He went down hard, face planting, onto the floor with a thud that shook the furniture. He slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop at the feet of one of his investors. He tried to scramble up, groaning, clutching his legs, but I was already there. I placed my boot directly in the center of his back and pressed down, pinning him to the floor like the insect he was. I leaned over him, putting all my weight, all my anger, all the strength of a father protecting his child into that one point of contact. "You think you can run from me, boy?" I growled, my voice low and dangerous, audible only to him and the people closest to us. "You think you can hurt my daughter and just walk away?" "Let me up," he wheezed, struggling against my boot. "You are assaulting me. I will sue you. I will take everything." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You have nothing, Jason. I have the videos. I have the toxicology report. I have the insurance fraud documents you tried to hide, and I have the dog you tried to drown. You are done." I looked up. The room was frozen, watching the old man they had dismissed as senile hold the predator down with effortless dominance. "Someone call the police," I said calmly, "and tell them to bring handcuffs. I have a piece of garbage for them to collect." Jason stopped struggling. He went limp under my boot, sobbing into the carpet. It wasn't the cry of a man who was sorry. It was the cry of a man who knew he had lost. I looked over at Emily. Sarah was helping her back into her chair. Buster standing guard at her side, growling low in his throat every time he looked at Jason. Emily met my eyes. She was weeping, but there was something else in her expression now. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity, and it was gratitude. I kept my foot on his back, feeling the rise and fall of his pathetic breathing, and I waited for the sirens. I didn't move an inch. I stood there like a statue, like the pillar of the family. I had always been guarding what was mine until the flashing lights washed over the walls. The wail of sirens cut through the night air, growing louder, until the red and blue lights washed over the living room walls, strobing like a fever dream. The guests who had been frozen in a tableau of shock finally began to move, parting like the Red Sea as the front door burst open. Detective Frank Miller walked in, flanked by 3 uniformed officers. I knew Frank. We had spent countless Sunday mornings sitting in a boat on Lake Michigan waiting for perch to bite, not saying a word because we didn't have to. He was a good man, a tired man, and tonight he looked like the hand of God coming to deliver judgment. Frank took in the scene in a single glance. The overturned furniture, the shattered glass, the dog guarding the weeping woman in the wheelchair, and me, Victor Caldwell, standing over my son-in-law with my boots still pressing him into the carpet. "You can let him up now," Victor Frank said, his voice calm and authoritative. "We have it from here." I stepped back, removing my foot. Jason scrambled backward, crab walking, until he hit the wall. He pulled himself up. His suit ruined his hair. Wild sweat pouring down his face. He looked at the police, and for a split second I saw relief in his eyes. He thought he could talk his way out of this. He thought he could charm the badge just like he charmed everyone else. "Officer, thank God. Thank." Jason panted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This man is insane. He is having a psychotic break. He assaulted me. He held me hostage in my own home. You need to arrest him immediately." Frank didn't look at me. He looked at Jason. "We received a call about an attempted murder, Mr. Thorne." Frank said, "And we have been reviewing some interesting footage that was just live-reamed to a cloud server." Jason's eyes darted around the room. "That video is fake," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It is a deep fake. He made it with AI. He has been planning this. He is senile. Don't you understand he hates me? He doctored the footage to frame me because he is jealous of my success." I reached into my jacket pocket. The officer's hands drifted to their holsters, a reflex. "Easy, boys," I said calmly. "I'm just getting the evidence." I pulled out the small glass jar containing the green liquid I had saved from the smoothie. I held it up to the light. The sludge looked innocent enough, but we all knew it was deadly. "This is the smoothie he tried to feed my daughter yesterday," I said, my voice steady. "I swapped it out. I had it tested at the veterinary lab. It is full of arsenic." Jason laughed a high manic sound. "A vet lab. You're going to trust a dog doctor. He probably poisoned it himself. He is trying to kill her to get his hands on the insurance money he is projecting." I reached into my other pocket. I pulled out the plastic bag containing the waterlogged manila envelope. The edges were still damp, smelling of river water. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "And this," I said, "this is the insurance policy you took out on Emily 3 days ago. $5 million, along with the foreclosure notices for the gambling debts you thought you hid." Jason stared at the envelope. He knew exactly what was inside. He knew his fingerprints were all over it. He knew the river water on the paper matched the mud in his car trunk. "That was stolen," he stammered, losing steam. "You stole my private property." I ignored him. I looked at Frank. "He threw this in the river 3 nights ago." Frank weighted down inside a crate. And inside that crate, he put Buster. I pointed to the dog who was still pressing his body against Emily's legs. He tried to drown the dog to hide the papers. He tried to poison my daughter to collect the payout. And tonight he was going to finish the job in front of all these witnesses, hoping her death would look like a tragedy instead of a hit. Frank looked at Jason. The detective's face hardened. The friendship was gone. This was just a cop looking at a criminal. Jason Thorne, Frank said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Jason backed away, shaking his head violently. No, you can't do this." "I am a respected businessman. I have rights." "You are listening to a crazy old man." 2 officers moved forward, flanking him. Jason looked at the sliding glass door again, calculating the distance. "Don't even think about it, son," Frank warned. Jason slumped. The fight went out of him. He held out his wrists, his face crumpling into a mask of self-pity. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he sobbed. "I just needed a little more time. I could have fixed it." As the officers moved to cuff him, I stepped forward. "Wait," I said. The room went silent. I walked up to Jason. He flinched, expecting me to hit him again. I didn't. I reached out and took his left hand. On his wrist sat the PC Felipe watch. It was gold heavy and beautiful. I had bought it for him 5 years ago on the day he married Emily. I had engraved the back with the words, "For time and eternity." I had given it to him as a symbol of his place in this family, a symbol of the future I thought he would build with my daughter. "You don't wear this," I said softly. I undid the clasp. It clicked open. I slid the watch off his wrist. His skin was pale where the gold had been. "This was a gift for a man," I said, looking him in the eye. "A man who was going to protect my daughter. A man who had a future." I put the watch in my pocket. "You don't have a future anymore, Jason. And you certainly don't deserve the time of this family." Jason looked at his bare wrist, then at me. For the first time, I saw the realization hit him. It wasn't just about the money. He had lost everything. He had lost his status. He had lost his freedom. He had lost the very identity he had built his lies upon. "Take him," I said to the officers. "Get him out of my house." They snapped the cuffs on. The metallic click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. They spun him around and marched him toward the door. Jason started screaming. Then it wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage. "You ruined me," he howled, twisting in their grip. "You ruin everything, old man. I hope you rot in this house. I hope you die alone." I watched him go. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a profound, exhausting relief. He was gone. The cancer that had been eating my family was cut out. I turned back to the room. The guests were still staring, shell-shocked. But my eyes were only for Emily. She was sitting in her wheelchair, her face buried in Buster's neck. She was shaking her whole body, convulsing with silent sobs. The adrenaline that had kept her upright during the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the crushing weight of the truth. She had just watched the man she loved, the man she trusted, get dragged away in handcuffs for trying to murder her. I walked over to her. I knelt down, my knees cracking, and wrapped my arms around her and the dog. "It is over, baby," I whispered. "He is gone. You are safe." Emily looked up at me. Her eyes were wide and glassy. She looked like she was seeing me for the first time in years. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. He gave me the drink." He smiled at me. "I know, sweetheart. I know. He wanted me to die." She said the words fracturing as they left her mouth. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her body went limp in my arms. "Emily!" I shouted. "Frank was there in a second." "Get the paramedics!" he yelled to the officer at the door. We laid her down on the floor. Her pulse was thready weak. The poison Jason had been feeding her for months had taken its toll, and the shock was too much for her weakened heart. I held her hand, chafing her cold skin. "Stay with me, Emily," I begged. "Don't you dare leave me now. We just got him. We won. You have to live to see it." Buster wheezed, licking her face frantically. The paramedics rushed in, their equipment clattering. They pushed me back gently. I stood up, feeling useless, feeling old. I watched them work on my little girl. I watched them put an oxygen mask on her face. I watched them lift her onto a stretcher. I followed them out to the ambulance, the Buster trotting at my heels. I climbed in the back, holding her hand the whole way. I looked out the back window as we sped away. The house lit up by the police lights looked like a war zone. And it was. It was the battlefield where I had fought for my daughter's life. I squeezed her hand. "I am here," I whispered. "Dad is here, and I am never leaving you again." The antiseptic smell of the hospital waiting room was sharp enough to burn the inside of my nose. A stark contrast to the scent of river mud and old wood that seemed permanently etched into my memory over the last few days. I sat on a vinyl chair that was too hard for my old bones, my elbows resting on my knees, my head in my hands. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a monotonous buzzing sound that felt like a drill boring into my skull. I'd been sitting there for 3 hours. 3 hours of watching nurses and scrubs rush past. 3 hours of listening to the quiet sobs of strangers in the corner. 3 hours of praying to a God I hadn't spoken to since Martha died. Detective Miller sat next to me holding a cup of lukewarm coffee he hadn't touched. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me everything was going to be all right. He just sat there, a silent sentinel, letting me know I wasn't alone in the trenches. Finally, the double doors swung open. A doctor walked out looking exhausted, rubbing sanitizer onto his hands. He scanned the room and locked eyes with me. I stood up, my legs stiff and aching, my cane forgotten on the floor. Mr. Caldwell, the doctor, said, his voice calm and leveled. I nodded, unable to speak. The fear that had been a cold knot in my stomach tightened. "She is stable," he said. The air left my lungs in a rush, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Stable. She was alive. We ran a full toxicology screen confirming what your friend Dr. Sarah found. The doctor continued gesturing for me to sit back down. "It is acute heavy metal poisoning, arsenic specifically. It has been building up in her system for months, damaging her kidneys, and putting immense strain on her cardiovascular system. The collapse tonight was a combination of the cumulative poison and extreme emotional shock. Her heart went into arrhythmia, but we managed to stabilize her rhythm. We have started chat therapy to strip the metals from her blood." He paused, looking at me with a gravity that chilled me. "Mr. Caldwell, you need to understand how close this was. If she had drunk that glass tonight, the one you stopped her from taking the concentration of arsenic, would have caused massive organ failure within the hour. There would have been nothing we could have done. You didn't just stop a crime tonight. You saved her life in the most literal sense possible." I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Frank. He gave a firm squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of the war we had just won. "Can I see her?" I asked, my voice rasping. "She is waking up," the doctor said. "She is confused and she is in pain, but she is asking for you." I followed him down the long, sterile hallway. Room 304. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dim, lit only by the monitors that beeped in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Emily lay in the bed, looking small and fragile amidst the tangle of tubes and wires. Her skin was still pale, but the gray, deathly cast I had seen earlier was fading. I walked to the bedside and took her hand. It was warm. "Emily," I whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. She opened them slowly, focusing on my face. Her eyes were filled with tears before she even spoke. "Daddy," she croaked, her voice dry and brittle. "I am here, baby," I said, stroking her hair. "I am right here." She tried to squeeze my hand, but her grip was weak. "He tried to kill me," she said, the realization hitting her all over again. "Jason. He was poisoning me." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, but he can't hurt you anymore." "He is gone." Emily closed her eyes, tears leaking out and sliding into her hair. "I didn't believe you," she whispered, her voice laced with a guilt so heavy it seemed to crush her into the mattress. "He told me you were sick. He told me you were losing your mind. He made me believe that I needed to protect him from you. I pushed you away. I let him treat you like a burden in your own house. And all the while, you were the only one watching." "Shh," I soothed her. "Do not apologize. That is what predators do, Emily. They isolate you. They make you doubt your own eyes. They make you doubt the people who love you. He was good at it. He fooled everyone. But I should have known." She sobbed, her breath hitching. "I am your daughter. I should have known you weren't senile. I should have seen it." I leaned in close, resting my forehead against hers. "You were sick, Emily. You were being drugged. You weren't thinking clearly because he made sure you couldn't." I closed my eyes, and for a moment, the hospital room faded away. I was back in our bedroom 6 months ago, holding Martha's hand as she took her last breaths. The cancer had taken everything from her strength, her voice, but not her spirit. She had pulled me close, her grip surprisingly strong for a dying woman. "Protect her, Victor," she had rasped. "She has a blind spot for him. She loves too hard. You have to be the wall. You have to be the fortress. Promise me." I promised Martha, I thought. I kept the wall standing. I opened my eyes and looked at my daughter. "Your mother told me to look out for you," I said softly. "I was just following orders." Emily let out a watery laugh that turned into a cough. I held a cup of water to her lips, helping her sip. "What happens now?" she asked, looking at the door as if she expected Jason to walk in with a smile and a fresh glass of poison. "Now we heal," I said firmly. "We get the poison out of your blood. We get your strength back. And we let the lawyers and the police handle the trash." As if summoned, there was a light knock on the door. I turned to see Frank Miller standing there, looking uncomfortable in the doorway. Behind him was Stan Kowalski, my lawyer, looking disheveled but grimly satisfied. "Can we come in for a minute?" Frank asked. I looked at Emily. She nodded, wiping her face. "We have news," Stan said, stepping into the room. He was holding a briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. "They took Jason to the precinct," Frank said. "He held out for about an hour. Tried to play the victim. Tried to say you assaulted him and that the videos were fake. And then I asked, and then we showed him the toxicology report from the vet," Frank said. "And we played him the audio recording from the bank, the one where he talked about the Maldives." Stan stepped forward. "That broke him," Stan said with a dark satisfaction. He realized there was no wiggling out of this. His lawyer advised him to cooperate to avoid the death penalty. He sang Victor. He sang like a canary. "What did he say?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "He admitted to everything," Frank said gently. "The arsenic, the insurance fraud, the gambling debts to the loan sharks in Chicago. He even gave up the name of the guy who sold him the arsenic on the dark web. That is going to help the DA build a case not just against him, but against a whole supply chain." Stan opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. "And there is more," Stan said. "Because he confessed to premeditated attempted murder, With special circumstances financial gain, the district attorney is throwing the book at him. They are charging him with everything: attempted murder, in the first degree insurance fraud, animal cruelty, elder abuse. He is looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never walk free again. Emily let out a long, shuddering breath, her body relaxing into the mattress. And his assets, I asked. Stan smirked. Seized everything. The expensive car, the offshore accounts he tried to hide his investments. The court has granted an immediate freezing order. It will all be liquidated to pay for your medical bills, Emily, and for restitution. He wanted your money. Now every dime he ever touched is going to go toward healing the damage he caused. I looked at my daughter. The fear was finally starting to leave her eyes, replaced by a dawn of realization. She was free. She was safe. It is really over. She whispered. It is over. I confirmed. Frankenstein stayed for a few more minutes, then left us alone. I sat back in the chair, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving me exhausted in a way I had never felt before. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The tremors were gone. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Jason sat in a cold cell, stripped of his suits and his lies, facing a future of concrete walls. And here in this room, my daughter was breathing. I turned back to her. Get some sleep, Emily. I said I will be right here when you wake up. She reached out her hand again. I took it. Dad, she said. Yeah, honey. Can we get another dog? She asked, a small smile touching her lips. You know, so Buster has a friend. I laughed, a sound that felt like something breaking loose in my chest. We can get a whole pack. I said we have the room, and I think Buster would like that. I sat back down, holding her hand. And for the first time in 6 months, I closed my eyes and let myself rest. The wall had held. The fortress was secure, and the wolf was gone. 6 months have passed since the night the sirens wailed and the blue lights flashed against the brickwork of my home. The seasons have turned, and the biting, cruel cold of that Chicago winter has finally melted away, replaced by the golden, hazy warmth of early autumn. The leaves on the oak trees are turning the color of fire, and the river, the same river that almost claimed an innocent life, flows calmly now, reflecting the amber light of the setting sun. I sat on the edge of the refurbished dock, a fishing rod in my hand, listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the pilings. It is strange how a place of such violence can become a place of peace again, if you give it enough time and enough love. Next to me sat Emily. She didn't look like the ghost I had carried out of the house that night. Her cheeks were round and flushed with color. Her hair, which had been dull and brittle from the poison, shone in the sunlight. She was holding her own fishing rod, laughing, as her line got tangled in the weeds for the 3rd time. She wasn't in a wheelchair anymore. She was sitting cross-legged on the wood, strong, vibrant, and alive. Down by the shoreline, a golden blur was tearing through the mud, chasing a flock of indignant ducks. Buster. He had a slight limp in his back leg, a permanent reminder of the crate, but he didn't let it slow him down. He barked a joyous, booming sound that echoed across the water and then looked back at us, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. He was the king of this riverbank now, not its victim. It is beautiful out here, Dad, Emily said, reeling in her empty hook. I never thought I would want to come back to this spot. I thought it would always feel like a graveyard. I looked at her, my heart swelling with a gratitude so fierce it almost hurt. It is just water, Emily, I said softly. It is what we put into it that matters. Jason put hate into it. We are putting life back into it. She smiled, but her eyes grew thoughtful. She looked down at her hands, strong hands that were no longer trembling. I sold the house today, she said quietly. The papers went through. I couldn't live there anymore, Dad. Not in the room where he mixed, where he did those things. I nodded. I knew she had put it on the market. It was the right decision. That house was a monument to a lie. Good, I said. You don't need a fortress. You need a home. I put my fishing rod down and reached into the tackle box next to me, but I didn't pull out a lure. I pulled out a thick blue folder. Speaking of homes, I said, handing it to her, I have something for you. Emily looked at the folder, puzzled. She wiped her hands on her jeans and took it. What is this? She asked. Open it, I said. She flipped the cover open. Her eyes scanned the top document. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad, she breathed. This is your old company. It was Caldwell Construction. I had sold the majority shares 10 years ago when I retired, thinking I was too old, thinking I needed to rest. But I had kept an eye on it. And I knew the current owners were looking to sell. I bought it back this morning, I said, watching her face. I used the money from my own savings, the money I told Jason about but never let him touch. I wasn't senile Emily. I was just hiding my resources until the time was right. She looked up at me, tears shimmering in her eyes. But why, she asked. You retired. You hated the paperwork. I did, I admitted. But you didn't. You have a business degree, Emily. You spent 5 years managing Jason's office, fixing his mistakes, making him look successful while he gambled it all away. You are the one who knows how to run things. You are the one with the vision. I pointed to the line at the bottom of the document. Read the title, I said. She looked down. Emily Thorne, CEO, she read aloud. Her voice shook. I don't want you to just survive, baby, I said, reaching out to cover her hand with mine. I want you to build. Jason tried to tear you down. He tried to erase you. I want you to build something so big, so solid that no one can ever make you feel small again. I am too old to run crews, but I can be your advisor. I can be the old man in the corner office who yells at the subcontractors. But it is your company. It is your life. Emily dropped the folder and threw her arms around my neck. She smelled like river water and sunlight and life. She sobbed into my shoulder, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of a future being given back. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for everything. I held her tight, looking over her shoulder at the river. Buster had abandoned the ducks and was trotting up the dock, shaking water all over us, barking happily. I used to think I was done, I thought to myself. I used to sit in that chair by the window and wait for the clock to run out. I thought I was just an old relic, a piece of furniture that got in the way. I thought my job as a father was over. But that wooden crate at the bottom of the river taught me something. It taught me that a father is never done. It taught me that as long as my children are breathing, I have a purpose. I am not just an old man with a cane. I am a wall, I am a shield, and if anyone ever tries to hurt my family again, they will find out that this old construction worker still knows how to swing a hammer. We packed up our gear as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Emily pushed my wheelchair not because I needed it, but because she wanted to take care of me for a change. Buster walked beside us, his head held high. We walked away from the river, leaving the ghosts behind in the deep water. We were going to get dinner. We were going to talk about building permits and zoning laws. We were going to live. If you believe that justice always finds a way, and that a parent's love is the most powerful force on earth, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that they are stronger than they think. And never ever forget to keep your eyes open, because sometimes the devil wears a smile and sits at your breakfast table. But the warrior who can stop him might just be the person you least expect.